The first thing Gideon Vale noticed was the hat. It appeared in the stagecoach doorway before the woman beneath it, a narrow-brimmed thing of dark blue felt, pinned with a silver clasp. It belonged beneath an Eastern hotel awning, not in Cinder Creek, where dust coated the windows from the inside. Gideon's hand tightened around the hitching rail. Sheriff Asa Bell, standing beside him with a coffee cup gone cold, followed his stare and let out a low whistle. "That her?" "No." The sheriff glanced at him. "Expecting another coach?" "No." A gloved hand found the brass rail. A polished boot stepped onto the iron rung. Then the woman descended into the yellow dust with the care of someone who understood that every eye in town had turned toward her and refused to give those eyes the satisfaction of seeing her stumble. She was not the sturdy frontier widow Gideon had requested from the matrimonial agency. Her traveling coat was cut close at the waist, its wool dark as a winter sky. Her boots were too fine for mud, her posture too straight for submission, and her face— Gideon looked away before the thought finished. Beauty had no business in the decision before him. Beauty did not split kindling, patch a roof, calm a mule, or keep a man from freezing when the pass vanished beneath 6 feet of snow. The coachman climbed down and began dragging luggage from the rear boot. One worn valise. One rectangular leather case no larger than a family Bible, reinforced at the corners with brass and secured by 2 small locks. That was all. The woman scanned the boardwalk, the saloon, and the hitching posts. When her eyes found Gideon, they stopped. He stood a head taller than most men, his coat smelling of pine smoke and horse sweat. He saw the instant she understood he was the man from the letters. Something tightened at the corners of her mouth. Not disgust, not quite fear. Calculation. Gideon knew that look. He had worn it himself while judging thin ice, wounded animals, and men who smiled too quickly. The sheriff murmured, "She's coming over. I can see that. You ought to take your hat off." Gideon looked at him. Asa lifted both hands. "Or don't." She crossed the street and stopped 3 paces away. Up close, the expensive impression weakened. One cuff hid fraying. A glove bore careful stitches. Fatigue shadowed her eyes. She looked less like a lady arriving and more like one who had spent the last 100 miles refusing to fall apart. "Mr. Vale?" she asked. Her voice was composed, low, and unmistakably educated. Gideon nodded once. "Miss Mercer." "Eleanor Mercer." Her gaze moved over his face, his rifle, and the knife at his belt. "Most people call me Nell. I don't." A faint line appeared between her brows. "You may, once we know each other." Asa covered a cough with his fist. Gideon ignored him. "There's been a mistake." Nell did not glance back at the coach. "Has there? I asked for a woman accustomed to frontier work. I read your letter. I asked for someone who could endure a winter at Vale Pass. I read that portion as well. You ever spent a winter above 8,000 feet? No. Handled a team on ice? No. Dressed game? No. Swung an axe? Not successfully." The blunt answer caught him off guard. Nell shifted the leather case from one hand to the other. She had not put it down since leaving the coach. Behind her, the driver tossed the valise into the dirt and called for passengers to board. The coach would continue west within minutes. Gideon looked at the woman's narrow shoulders and the polished boots already gathering dust around the soles. "You won't last one night on my mountain." The words came out harder than he intended. Men outside the saloon turned to listen. Nell's face changed by less than a breath. Her chin lifted, though her eyes remained level with his chest. "Then perhaps," she said, "you should try to keep me alive until morning." A laugh near the saloon doors died when Gideon looked over. He faced her again. "This isn't a joke. I did not mistake it for one." The way station sits 23 miles from the nearest neighbor. Snow closes the north road by November. The south bridge rots a little more every season, and I have supplies for one person because I expected the woman who answered me to know how to earn her share. At that, something cold entered her expression. "I did answer you, Mr. Vale. The agency forwarded my letter. You replied. I replied to a description. You replied to me." He remembered her practical handwriting. She had claimed knowledge of bookkeeping, machinery, and isolation, not farm work. He had assumed the rest, and the realization irritated him. Nell continued, "Your advertisement said you required a wife who could help maintain a remote way station, manage stores, keep accounts, and learn what she did not know. It did not say she must arrive with an axe over one shoulder. You expect me to teach you everything while winter bears down? I expect us to honor what we wrote." The driver shouted, "2 minutes." Nell's fingers closed around the case. She glanced toward the open coach door, and Gideon saw not longing but dread. The road behind her frightened her more than the mountain ahead. He had spent too many years reading trails to miss a sign that plain. "Who's following you?" he asked. The color left her face. Asa lowered his coffee cup. Nell recovered quickly, but not quickly enough. "No one. That case says otherwise. It says I value my belongings. You let the driver throw your clothes in the dirt. You haven't loosened your grip on that box once." Her gaze hardened. "The contents are private. They become my concern if trouble rides to my door. Not before we are married." Silence settled between them. The coachman climbed onto his seat and gathered the reins. "Last call, ma'am." Nell turned halfway toward the coach. The movement was small, but Gideon saw the cost of it. If she boarded, she would not simply be leaving Cinder Creek. She would be surrendering to something she had crossed half a country to escape. He disliked mysteries and being maneuvered. He disliked even more that his choice would decide whether this stranger had shelter before nightfall. He looked toward the sheriff. "Judge still in his office?" Asa studied him. "Until supper." Nell turned back. "What are you asking?" "I'm asking whether the terms in your letter were honest." "They were." "You can keep accounts?" "Yes." "Repair machinery?" "Some kinds." "Follow instructions when a mistake can kill you?" "If the instructions are sound." Asa's mouth twitched. Gideon stepped closer. Nell held her ground, though he saw the pulse beat once in her throat. "I have no parlor," he said, "no hired help, no church within Sunday distance. You'll work, you'll be cold, you'll be frightened, and the mountain won't care that you came a long way." Her eyes did not leave his. "I did not come looking for mercy." "What did you come for?" "A lawful name," she said, "and distance." It was not the whole truth. It was enough for the moment. Gideon looked at the coach. The driver snapped the reins, and the horses leaned into their harness. The stage rolled west, wheels groaning, carrying the last easy chance for either of them to undo the day. Nell watched until it passed the end of the street and disappeared behind a curtain of dust. Only then did she breathe. Gideon reached down, lifted her valise, and found it nearly empty. "Judge's office," he said. She blinked. "You still intend to marry me?" "I intend to hear the terms before witnesses." "That is not the same answer." It's the only one you're getting in the street. He started walking. After a moment, her footsteps followed. Judge Hollis occupied 2 rooms above the mercantile, where ink and tobacco clung to the walls. He was thin, white-whiskered, and unsurprised by human trouble. He listened while Gideon stood near the window and Nell sat upright in the only chair without a broken spindle. Asa leaned against the doorframe as witness. No affection promised, Judge Hollis said, scratching notes with a steel nib. No dowry, no exchange of property except by mutual agreement. Mrs. Vale is to have access to household funds and the way station ledgers. Mr. Vale retains ownership of the original claim. Nell retains ownership of her personal case and everything inside it, Gideon added. The judge looked over his spectacles. You know what's inside. No. Comforting. Nell folded her hands around the case on her lap. I also require the right to leave. Gideon turned from the window. The judge's pen stopped. She met Gideon's stare. If either of us decides the arrangement cannot continue, I will not be prevented from returning to Cinder Creek. I will not be locked in, restrained, or surrendered to any person claiming authority over me without an order signed by a territorial judge. Asa straightened from the wall. There it was, the outline of the danger, dark beneath the surface. Gideon asked, Has someone claimed that authority before? Nell's fingers pressed into the leather. I am stating my condition. He could refuse, but the thought of binding her by force turned his stomach. My condition, he said, is that you tell me before you run. If danger is coming, I need time to prepare. I can agree to that. You don't leave in a storm. I can agree to that as well. And you don't lie about anything that could get us killed. Her hesitation lasted 1 heartbeat. I agree. Gideon wondered which word she had chosen carefully. Anything. Or killed. Judge Hollis cleared his throat. Are we conducting a marriage or negotiating a railroad charter? Marriage, Nell said. Terms first, Gideon said at the same time. For the first time, she looked directly at him without calculation. Something almost like understanding passed through her expression. The ceremony took less than 5 minutes. There were no flowers or family. Judge Hollis read the required words while wagon wheels rattled below. When asked whether he took Eleanor Mercer as his lawful wife, Gideon remembered Owen laughing as they raised the way station roof, then the avalanche's thunder, and the silence after it swallowed his brother. 3 empty winters pressed behind his answer. I do, he said. Nell's answer came quietly, but without uncertainty. I do. The judge signed. Asa witnessed. Nell wrote Eleanor Vale, in a hand so controlled that only Gideon, watching closely, noticed the pen tremble on the final letter. Outside, the sun had begun its descent toward the western ridge. The day's heat was draining fast. Gideon loaded her valise behind the wagon seat, then reached for the leather case. Nell pulled it against her body. That rides with me. So does every loose object until the road turns steep. It does not leave my hand. He regarded her for a moment, then climbed onto the driver's bench. Suit yourself. She approached the wagon and looked at the iron step. Her skirt made the climb awkward. Gideon offered his hand. Nell stared at it. His palm was broad and scarred. He expected her to refuse. Instead, she placed her gloved hand in his. Her grip was firmer than it looked. He drew her up beside him, careful not to pull too hard. The wagon shifted beneath their combined weight. Nell settled on the bench with the locked case across her knees, her back straight, her face turned toward the mountains rising beyond town. From the street, Vale Pass was only a notch cut between two distant walls of stone. Clouds had begun gathering there, thin and gray as smoke. Asa came to the wheel. Weather turned cold on the north slope yesterday. I know. You'll reach the old bridge before dark if you don't stop. I know. The sheriff lowered his voice. And if whatever she's running from comes through town. Gideon gathered the reins. Find out how many men. Nell heard him. He knew because her shoulders shifted beneath the blue coat, though she did not turn. Asa nodded once and stepped back. Gideon clicked his tongue. The two mules leaned forward, harness chains tightening, and the wagon rolled east through Cinder Creek. Town sounds followed them. The blacksmith's hammer, a dog, the saloon piano. Then the buildings fell behind. The road narrowed between dry hills stained gold by late summer. Ahead, the mountains rose higher with every turn, their upper slopes already touched by the first white of the coming season. Nell watched them without speaking. Gideon kept his eyes on the road. They were married, they were strangers. Somewhere behind them stood the life she feared, and somewhere ahead waited a mountain that had already taken the person Gideon loved most. Neither of them looked back. The wagon entered the foothills as the light thinned from gold to iron. Gideon felt the change before he saw it. The mules shortened their stride. Wind slipped down through the cut between the ridges, carrying the smell of cold stone and distant snow. Sage gave way to pine, and the road began to climb in long switchbacks scarred by runoff. Nell sat beside him with the leather case across her knees. She had stopped watching the mountains and started watching the road. That was better. Keep your weight uphill when we turn, Gideon said. She shifted without argument. The wagon rounded a shelf of granite. Below them, the valley dropped away in layers of darkening timber. Cinder Creek had vanished behind the lower hills. No church steeple, no smoke, no road home. Nell drew one gloved hand over the brass corner of the case. How much farther? She asked. 2 hours if the bridge holds. She looked at him. That does not sound encouraging. It wasn't meant to. A branch scraped the wagon's canvas cover with a dry hiss. One mule flicked an ear. Gideon kept the team slow. The south road had been bad in June. Summer storms could have peeled another foot of earth from the outer edge or shifted the abutments where the bridge crossed Widow's Cut. He had intended to inspect it the week before, but a bear had gotten into the smokehouse and cost him 3 days. He disliked being late to anything that could kill him. They climbed another mile before he saw the first sign. A fresh seam of dirt crossed the road, where water had run hard enough to move fist-sized stones. Pine needles lay plastered against the uphill bank. One of the wheel ruts ended abruptly at a shallow collapse near the drop. Gideon pulled the mules to a halt. Nell looked ahead. What is it? He climbed down and crouched beside the washed-out rut. The soil crumbled beneath his thumb. Stay seated. He walked forward, testing the road with each step. 20 yards ahead, the land narrowed into Widow's Cut, where a timber bridge crossed a ravine gouged by spring snowmelt. The structure was no more than 30 feet long, but the water below had carved the gorge deep and steep. The bridge still stood. Its near railing did not. One support post hung crooked over the ravine, and the first 3 deck planks had split along the grain. Farther in, the bridge sagged toward the downstream side by several inches. Gideon knelt and pressed a hand to the main beam. The wood was damp. He heard Nell's boots behind him. I told you to stay with the wagon. You also said it might not hold. I thought a second pair of eyes might be useful." He turned. She stood several feet back, skirt gathered in one hand, case in the other. "This is not an account book." "No," she said, studying the sag in the deck. "But weight still behaves like weight." He looked under the bridge. The downstream sill had shifted off its stone footing. One hard jolt could roll the whole structure sideways. The only other route to Vale Pass required a 2-day descent and a northern approach that might already be snowed in. Nell followed his gaze into the gorge. "Can we cross on foot?" "You can. The wagon can't." "Can we leave it?" "Not with half the winter stores in back." She glanced toward the wagon. "Then what can we remove?" "Enough to lighten the load. Maybe." Gideon returned to the team and began untying sacks: flour, salt, dried beans, lamp oil, ammunition, iron stove parts he had purchased in town. All of it mattered. Nell set her case beneath a pine and came to help. She lifted one sack of beans, managed 3 steps, then had to set it down. Gideon watched her press both hands to her lower back. "Don't tear yourself open the first mile. I am learning the sack's opinion of me." Despite himself, he almost smiled. They carried what they could to the far side by hand. Gideon crossed first, placing his boots above the beams rather than the weakened planks. The bridge complained with each step. Nell followed with the lamp oil, moving carefully and never looking down. It took nearly an hour. By then, the light had faded further and the wind had sharpened. Gideon had transferred the heaviest supplies, leaving only the valise, spare tools, blankets, and 2 crates of canned goods in the wagon. The locked case remained beneath the pine. He led the mules to the bridge. Nell stood at the far end. "What do you need me to do?" "Nothing. Stay clear. That has not been a successful arrangement so far. If the bridge goes, I need one of us not standing on it." That silenced her. Gideon took the lead mule by the cheek strap and stepped onto the deck. The animal resisted, nostrils flaring at the gaps. He spoke low and kept moving. The second mule followed, harness chains clinking. The wagon's front wheels reached the first beam. Wood groaned under the weight. Gideon guided the team forward, one measured step at a time. The bridge sagged, then steadied. The first wheel rolled over a cracked plank. The rear axle entered the span. 10 feet. 15. The far bank was close enough for Nell's face to sharpen in the dusk. Then the downstream beam split. The sound was low and violent, like a tree breaking under snow. The wagon lurched sideways. One mule screamed. The right rear wheel punched through the deck, dropping to the hub. The wagon bed tilted toward the ravine, dragging the team backward. The traces snapped tight. Gideon threw himself against the lead mule's shoulder, trying to keep it from rearing. "Gideon! Back!" The broken side of the bridge dipped another inch. A crate slid across the wagon bed and struck the rail. The rail tore free and disappeared into the gorge. Gideon grabbed the brake lever and hauled it down. The iron teeth caught one wheel, but the trapped wheel stayed lodged between 2 beams. The bridge shifted beneath his boots. He saw the problem in a single glance. The wagon's remaining load had slid to the low side. Nell's valise, the tool chest, both crates, and a coil of chain were all pressing toward the broken beam. "Cut the rear lashings," he shouted. Nell ran toward the wagon. "I said stay back. You need the weight gone." She was right, and there was no time to argue. Gideon pulled his knife and tossed it across the gap. It struck the planks near her boots. Nell snatched it up, stepped onto the trembling bridge, and moved along the uphill edge. "Not the supply crates," he said. "The valise first, then the chain." She reached the wagon bed. The entire structure shuddered. One of the mules lost footing and dropped to its knees. Nell climbed onto the rear wheel brace. Her fine coat snagged on a splinter and tore from hem to hip. She did not notice. The lashings had twisted beneath the shifted cargo. She sawed at the rope with Gideon's knife. Her first cut slipped. The blade glanced off the knot and sliced through her glove. She flinched, then gripped the rope barehanded. The knot broke. Her valise slid toward her. She caught the handle and dragged it onto the tilted tailboard. "Throw it off the uphill side," Gideon called. Nell pulled once. The valise barely moved. She braced a boot against the wheel brace and hauled again. The bridge gave another sickening crack. The far end dropped. Nell stared at the valise. Something changed in her face. Gideon saw her understand that she could not save what was inside and save herself at the same time. She cut the handle. The valise burst open as it fell. A dark dress, a pair of shoes, folded linen, and a small framed photograph spun through the air. For one suspended instant, the photograph caught the last light. Then everything vanished into the ravine. Nell did not watch it fall. She turned and slashed the rope around the coil of chain. It rolled hard against the tailboard, tore through the remaining canvas cover, and dropped into the gorge with a crash of iron against stone. The wagon lifted enough for the trapped wheel to shift. "Get clear!" Gideon roared. Nell jumped from the brace to the uphill planks. Gideon released the brake and snapped the lead rope against the mule's flank. "Come on!" The team lunged. The trapped wheel tore free, ripping 2 planks loose. The wagon slammed forward. Gideon ran beside the mules as the entire span rolled beneath them. The rear wheel struck the far bank, climbed, and then the wagon surged onto solid ground. Behind them, the broken half of the bridge collapsed. Timbers folded into the ravine in a cloud of splinters and dust. The remaining deck twisted sideways, hanging by one beam above the dark water. The mules dragged the wagon another 20 yards before Gideon stopped them. For several seconds, no one moved. Then he turned. Nell stood at the edge of the ruined crossing with the knife still in her hand. Her hair had come loose beneath her hat. Blood darkened the cut glove. Her coat hung torn along one side. The locked leather case sat alone beneath the pine on the far bank, separated from them by a bridge that no longer existed. Gideon followed her gaze. "What was in the valise?" he asked. "My clothes. That all?" No. The word was nearly carried away by the wind. He looked toward the leather case. "You saved the wrong piece of luggage." "No," she said. "I saved the one that matters." The calm in her voice unsettled him more than panic would have. "How do we get it?" Nell studied the broken span. One main beam remained, angled from the near bank to the far abutment. It was no wider than a man's boot and slick with damp. "I can cross." "No. It weighs less than 10 pounds. You fall, I can't reach you. You said the case could bring danger to your door. Leaving it here does not remove that danger." Gideon hated that she was right twice in the same hour. He tied a rope around her waist. Nell looked down at the knot. "You do know I asked not to be restrained. This is the mountain disagreeing with your contract." A breath that might have been laughter left her. He anchored the rope around a pine and held the slack. Nell removed her ruined boots, tied them together by their laces, and hung them over one shoulder. In stockinged feet, she stepped onto the beam. Gideon watched every movement. She did not move gracefully. She moved deliberately. One foot, then the other, arms out, eyes fixed on the far bank. Halfway across, A loose section of bark peeled beneath her heel. She dropped to one knee. The rope snapped tight in Gideon's hands. Nell clung to the beam, breathing hard. For one terrible moment, she remained frozen above the gorge. "Look at me," Gideon said. She raised her head. "Not the water. Me." Her eyes found his across the gap. "3 more feet," he said. "Then the stone. Keep your weight low." She moved again. When she reached the far side, she crawled the last yard and pressed both palms into the dirt. Gideon let out a breath he had not known he was holding. Nell retrieved the case, fastened its handle through the rope, and sent it sliding across the beam. Gideon caught it before it struck the broken planks. Then she returned. This time, when she reached the near bank, Gideon took her forearm and pulled her onto solid ground. Momentum carried her against him. She was shaking, not delicately, not for effect. Her whole body trembled with the violence of fear held in check too long. Gideon kept one hand around her arm until she found her balance. "You could have died for that box." "So could you," she said, breathless, "for flour and lamp oil. That keeps us alive. So does this." He looked down at the case between them. "You owe me an explanation." "I know. When?" "When knowing does not put you in greater danger." His jaw tightened. "That may already be behind us." Nell bent to put on her boots. The soles were slick with mud. Her fingers fumbled once with the buttons before she forced them steady. Gideon picked up the case. She straightened quickly. "I can carry it." "I know." He placed it beneath the wagon seat and secured it with a length of rope. Nell watched the knot, then looked at him. She did not object. They resumed the climb in darkness. Without the bridge, there would be no returning to Cinder Creek by wagon. Gideon did not say it. Nell understood. The knowledge rode between them as surely as the locked case. The road steepened through a forest of black pine. Gideon lit the wagon lantern but kept the wick low. Snow appeared first in sheltered hollows, then in white streaks beneath the trees. The mule's breath rolled around their heads. Nell drew her torn coat closed with both hands. Gideon stopped once to take a wool blanket from beneath the seat. He laid it over her shoulders without comment. She pulled it tight. "Thank you." He clicked the team forward. An hour later, the trees opened. Vale Pass Way Station stood on a shelf of land below the ridge, its long roof leaning slightly beneath the weight of years. A stable and woodshed crouched behind it. The old telegraph poles marched away from the building in both directions, most stripped of wire, their crossarms black against the sky. No welcoming lamp burned in the windows. Gideon had left the place cold that morning, expecting to return alone if the agency's woman failed to appear. Now Nell sat beside him, mud on her stockings, blood on one glove, half her belongings at the bottom of Widow's Cut, and the only road behind them broken. The wagon rolled into the yard. "This is Vale Pass," Gideon said. Nell looked at the dark building, the dead telegraph line, and the ridge rising above it like a wall. Then she looked down at the locked case he had tied beneath their feet. "I suppose," she said quietly, "we had better make it livable." Gideon climbed down. For the first time since she had stepped off the coach, he did not wonder whether she would survive his mountain. He wondered what, exactly, she had carried onto it. The key stuck twice before the lock gave. Gideon shouldered the door open. Cold air rolled out carrying dust, old pine, and the sour trace of a chimney that had not drawn properly in months. Nell stepped in behind him. The way station's main room was larger than a cabin but less welcoming. A stone hearth occupied one wall, A counter divided the public side from the kitchen. 3 bunks had been built beneath the opposite wall, though one sagged badly. A blackened stove stood near the back door. 2 dark stains spread across the ceiling, where rain had worked through the shingles. On a desk, near the front window, sat a telegraph instrument beneath a gray sheet. Nell noticed it before she noticed the bed. Gideon noticed that. "You said the line was dead," she said. "It is. How long?" 7 years, maybe 8. She started toward the desk, then stopped and looked around again. "There are 2 rooms upstairs," Gideon said. "One leaks. The other doesn't much. That is a narrow distinction. It matters during a storm." He lit a lamp, then knelt at the hearth and laid kindling. Nell set the leather case beside the desk, but kept 1 foot near it. "What should I do?" "Bring in the blankets. Leave the food until I get the chimney drawing." She went outside. Gideon struck a match. Smoke rolled into the room before grudgingly lifting. He frowned at the flue. Owen had built it. The memory came without warning. His brother on the roof, laughing around a mouthful of nails, swearing the chimney would outlive them both. Owen had been wrong by 3 winters. By the time they unloaded the wagon, darkness had settled over the yard. Gideon rubbed down the mules while Nell carried what she could and stopped arguing when he took the heavier crates. Inside, he sliced salted pork into a skillet. Nell examined the shelves. "Where are the ledgers?" she asked. "Second drawer." "And your inventory?" "In my head." She looked at him. "It's worked so far. For 1 person. We crossed a bridge today. Accounts can wait. Hunger generally does not. There's enough." "How much?" He glanced toward the shelves. "Enough. That is not a number. It is in the mountains." Nell opened the second drawer. Inside lay a warped notebook, loose receipts, 2 tax notices, a packet of nails, and a dead moth. She lifted the notebook as though it might stain her. "We eat first," Gideon said. Their wedding supper was fried pork, bread softened in hot water, and coffee strong enough to float grit. Nell ate without complaint. Afterward, Gideon carried a blanket upstairs. The front room held a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chair missing 1 rung. A brown ring marked the ceiling above the footboard. "This is yours," he said. "Where will you sleep?" "Downstairs. There are bunks." "I know." She studied him. "And the other room?" "Leaks." That was not my question. The lamp flame shifted between them. "I won't come through this door unless you call me," he said. "You can bar it from inside." Her shoulders eased by a degree. "You need not sleep on the floor. I've slept worse places. That does not make it necessary. It makes it familiar." He set down the blanket. "Mr. Vale." He stopped. "Gideon," he said without looking back. "We signed the same paper." A pause. "Good night, Gideon." He descended before the way she said his name could alter anything. By dawn, frost had sealed the yard in white. Nell woke to chopping. She dressed in what remained, the blue coat over her torn skirt and boots still damp from widow's cut. The framed photograph was gone. So were her spare dresses, her mother's comb, and the letters she had carried through 5 states. She did not let herself think about them. Downstairs, Gideon had left coffee near the stove. Beside it lay a flannel shirt and a pair of canvas trousers. When he entered with split wood, he found her holding the trousers at arm's length. "You'll ruin your skirt," he said. "My skirt is already ruined. Then you won't mind changing. They are large enough to shelter a child." Use the rope on the peg for a belt. Do you issue commands before coffee as a matter of principle? Only useful ones. Half an hour later, she emerged with the canvas rolled at the ankles and cinched tight at the waist. The shirt swallowed her wrists. Gideon looked once. Better. That sounded almost approving. It means you won't trip over your hem. Outside, he showed her the well pump, smokehouse, woodshed, and root cellar. He demonstrated how to carry 2 smaller buckets rather than 1 full one. Nell tried 1 full bucket anyway. The wire handle cut into her fingers. Water sloshed over her boots before she crossed half the yard. Gideon took it before she dropped it. I had it. You had half of it on the ground. She set her jaw. I will improve. Yes. His certainty disarmed her more than mockery would have. That afternoon he taught her to split kindling. Not the log, he said when she raised the hatchet. The grain. I cannot see the grain. Then you're looking instead of reading. Wood does not contain sentences. Everything leaves a sign. He turned the piece toward the light and traced a seam with his thumb. Here. Her first blow buried the hatchet crookedly. After several attempts, she freed it and tried again. The wood split. The satisfaction was absurdly sharp. Gideon examined the break. Again. By the 3rd day, Nell's palms had blistered. By the 4th, 1 blister tore while she scrubbed a pot. Gideon left a tin of pine salve beside her cup without comment. She used it after he went outside. The station began to reveal its failures. The flour smelled damp near the bottom. 3 sacks of beans held weevils. A crate marked dried apples contained mostly mouse nests. The lamp oil would not last through January. 1 root cellar wall sweated moisture, and several onions had gone soft. Nell carried the warped ledger to the counter and made columns. Gideon returned from checking traps to find every edible item arranged across the floor. What happened? Nothing yet. That usually means something is about to. We have 11 weeks of flour at your present use. 14, if I reduce bread. Salt is adequate. Coffee is not. Coffee is always not. The root cellar needs ventilation, and the stovepipe leaks at the elbow. I know about the pipe. Then why is it still leaking? Because the roof comes first. The roof leaks in 2 places. 3. Nell looked up. The 3rd only shows in rain, he said. Snow melts. Eventually. Inside. He removed his coat. I've survived before. Alone, and not efficiently. The words landed harder than she intended. Gideon went still. A door seemed to close behind his eyes. I did not mean, you meant it. He lifted the flour barrel and carried it outside. Nell remained beside the ledger, ashamed and irritated in equal measure. She had been correct. Correctness did not excuse carelessness. She found him in the shed spreading flour across clean canvas. She picked up a sieve. What are you doing? He asked. Helping. You'll get flour on your coat. I have been informed the coat will not survive the mountain. A short breath left him. They worked in silence. After a while, Nell said, You built this place with your brother. His hands stopped. She had seen the name in an old tax notice. Gideon and Owen Vale. Way station license. I should not have spoken as if survival meant no one had been lost. Gideon stared at the flour between his fingers. He died above the north slope. Avalanche took him while we were bringing timber down. Nell waited. I told him the weather would hold. You could not command it. I read it wrong. That is not the same as killing him. It is when he follows you because he trusts your judgment. he resumed, breaking damp clumps apart. Nell understood why every cracked beam and change in wind seemed to offend him personally. He did not maintain Vale Pass merely to live. He maintained it as punishment for the one thing he had failed to foresee. She did not offer comfort he had not asked for. "Then we will count the supplies together," she said. "You will show me how to read snow before it falls. I will show you how to keep a ledger without moths." His eyes lifted to hers. After a moment, he handed her another sieve. That evening they ate onion stew thickened with the flour they had saved. Gideon showed her how cloud bands caught on the western peaks before a change in weather. Nell showed him how to mark daily use against remaining stores. They argued over coffee. They compromised on one pot each morning. On the fifth day, Nell uncovered the telegraph instrument. Dust filmed the brass sounder and key. The relay coils had corroded. A severed wire trailed through a hole in the wall and ended in a green-black curl. Gideon stood behind the counter repairing a harness. "You keep staring at that thing," he said. "I am deciding whether it is dead or merely neglected." Same result. "Not always." She pressed the key. It gave a dull click. Gideon watched her fingers. "You've used one." Nell released it. "Many people have seen telegraph instruments." "That wasn't what I said." She looked through the window at the old poles disappearing northward. The line ran to Cinder Creek, south before the bridge, north to a railroad camp that closed after the tunnel collapse. Her hand went still. Gideon noticed. "What?" "Nothing. That word is getting crowded." Before she could answer, wind struck the station hard enough to rattle the windows. Gideon crossed to the door. The sky above the western ridge had darkened to lead. Pine tops bent, recovered, then bent in another direction. Pellets of ice began clicking against the glass. He studied the clouds. "Bring in every loose tool," he said. "Then fill all 4 water buckets." Nell heard the urgency beneath his calm. "How bad?" "Worse than the roof can afford." They worked until dusk. Gideon lashed the stable doors, stacked feed beneath the driest wall, and carried a coil of rope and 2 iron pulleys inside. Nell filled the buckets, secured the shutters, and moved food and ledgers away from the leaks. By full dark, ice coated the windows. The wind had risen to a steady roar, but the building was tight, the animals sheltered, and nothing remained outside that could become a weapon. Nell stood beside the hearth, flexing her bandaged hands. Gideon set the pulleys beneath the counter. "What are those for?" she asked. "Roof work after the storm." She looked at the iron wheels and rope, then at the old beams overhead. The first heavy limb struck the shingles. Dust sifted down, but the roof held. Gideon listened until the timber above them settled. "Upstairs room is no good tonight," he said. "Take the sound bunk. I'll keep watch by the stove." Nell looked toward the narrow bunks and then back at him. "You cannot keep watch over weather." "No, but you intend to try." His gaze went to the ceiling stain, then to the wall where Owen's old snowshoes still hung. "Yes." Nell carried her blanket to the bunk. Before lying down, she placed the leather case beneath it and left the curtain open. It was a small thing. Gideon understood what it cost her. He lowered himself into the chair beside the stove. Outside, the storm closed over Vale Pass, sealing the way station inside a world of ice and wind. For the first time since Owen's death, Gideon did not face the sound alone. Near midnight, the west wall began to groan. Gideon opened his eyes before the second sound came. It traveled through the station in a long wooden complaint, deep enough to vibrate through the chair beneath him. Across the room, Nell pushed herself upright in the bunk. What was that? He was already on his feet. Stay inside. The wind struck the shutters, and the lamp flame bowed. From somewhere above the kitchen came a sharp series of pops as nails pulled against wet timber. Nell threw off her blanket. You said the roof was failing. I said stay inside. And you have said many things that were not answers. Gideon took the lantern and crossed to the back door. When he opened it, ice hit his face like thrown gravel. The yard had vanished beneath a shifting white haze. Every branch wore a thick glass sleeve. The great spruce west of the station bent toward the roof, its crown dragging under the weight. Gideon raised the lantern. A split ran down the trunk where two main limbs joined. He knew that tree. Owen had wanted to cut it the first year they built the station. Gideon had argued that its roots held the slope, and its branches broke the worst of the west wind. Another crack split the night. Back inside, he told Nell. Move the food and blankets against the east wall. Bring me the rope and the short axe. What are you going to do? Take weight off the lower limbs before the trunk gives. In this, if it falls whole, it takes the kitchen with it. He did not wait for agreement. He pulled his coat tight and crossed the yard, boots sliding over ice. The spruce leaned above him like a dark, straining tower. He looped a rope around the lowest limb and climbed onto the woodshed roof. Each gust made the tree groan under his hands. Ice cracked loose and struck his shoulders. Nell appeared below with the axe. You were supposed to move the supplies. I did. That fast? No. I decided the axe was more urgent. She held it up. Gideon crouched and reached down. Their fingers touched around the handle. Go back now, he said. Her face was pale in the lantern light. You cannot cut a tree apart faster than a storm can break it. I only need to change where it falls. He turned before she could answer. The first limb came down after 6 blows, crashing harmlessly into the yard. The spruce lifted slightly, freed of the weight. Gideon moved toward the second. The trunk split. The sound erased the wind. He jumped from the woodshed as the upper half of the spruce tore free. For one instant it seemed to hang above the station. Then it came down. The roof exploded beneath it. Shingles, ice, and branches crashed through the kitchen. The impact threw Gideon forward. He struck the ground on one shoulder, rolled, and heard Nell scream his name. A roof beam dropped across his legs. Pain flashed white through his body. He tried to rise. The beam held him flat from the upper thigh down, one jagged end buried beneath the fallen tree. Above him, the remaining roof structure twisted and settled. Nell, I'm here. She crawled through the wreckage from the doorway. Blood streaked one side of her forehead where flying wood had caught her, but her eyes were clear. Don't come under this, Gideon said. The rest may go. She ignored him and knelt near his shoulder. Can you breathe? Yes. Can you feel your feet? He moved them inside his boots. Pain answered. Yes. 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 She examined the beam without touching it. Can you lift it? If I could, I wouldn't be lying here. I need useful answers, Gideon. Despite the pain, something in him steadied. The tree's holding the far end down. Beam weighs 300 pounds, maybe more with the roof on it. You won't move it by hand. Nell looked toward the station. The lantern had gone out, but firelight from the stove flickered through the broken wall. The pulleys, she said. Leave them. Her head snapped toward him. If the roof shifts, it comes down on both of us. Take the supplies and go to the stable. Wait for daylight. And what happens to you? You stay alive. That was not the agreement. Ice rattled across the debris. Gideon heard another beam creak above them. Nell. No. She said it without anger. Then she crawled back through the broken doorway. For several seconds, he saw only darkness and blowing snow. The weight across his legs seemed to increase. His heart beat hard against the frozen ground. In the roar of the storm, memory opened beneath him. Snow rushing down the north slope. Owen waist-deep, then chest-deep, shouting once before the white swallowed his face. Gideon digging until his fingers bled, certain that strength applied long enough could reverse what had already happened. He closed his eyes. Not again. A light appeared in the doorway. Nell returned carrying the coil of rope over one shoulder and both iron pulleys in her arms. Behind her came the scrape of a stable door. "What are you doing?" Gideon demanded. "Changing the direction of the weight." One of the mules stumbled into the yard on a lead rope. Its ears lay flat against its head, and its eyes rolled white at the storm. Nell tied it beneath the lee of the stable, then dragged the pulleys across the wreckage. Gideon raised himself on one elbow. "You can't anchor to the roof." "I know." She pointed toward the upright support post at the corner of the woodshed. It stood beyond the fallen spruce, braced by two diagonal timbers. "That post? It might hold." "Might? You prefer certainty at inconvenient times." She looped the first pulley to the post with 3 turns of rope, then pulled the line across the yard. Her hands shook, but the knot she made was sound. "Where did you learn a bowline?" he asked. "Freight yard." She crawled to the fallen beam and wrapped a second length around it, working close to his trapped legs. "Higher," he said. "Near the break. If you pull from the middle, it rolls." She adjusted the sling. "Now fix the second pulley to that loop. Run the line from the post block through it and back." She did, feeding the stiff rope through the iron wheels. Ice formed along the fibers as quickly as she handled them. When the rig was complete, Nell drew the free end toward the mule. Gideon saw the flaw. "The angle's wrong." She stopped. "Line will drag the beam toward me before it lifts." Nell studied the ropes. The storm tore loose strands of hair across her face. Then she looked at the wagon, half buried near the stable. "The wheel. What?" "If I run the free line over the top of the wagon wheel, it raises the pull. The wheel won't turn under side load. I do not need it to turn." She freed the wagon brake, wedged stones beneath the opposite wheels, and passed the rope over the iron rim. The wagon wheel became a crude change of direction, lifting the line above the beam. Gideon stared at the arrangement. It was ugly. It was dangerous. It might work. Nell tied the free end to the mule's traces. "Not the lead rope," he said. "Use the breast strap. If the line snaps against its neck, it'll bolt." She changed the attachment. Another crack sounded overhead. A section of ceiling collapsed 6 feet from Gideon, filling the air with dust and ice. Nell flinched but did not run. "Listen to me," he said. "Take the slack out slowly. If the post leans, stop. If the wagon moves, stop. If the rope frays, stop. And when the beam rises, I pull myself clear. You can barely lift your shoulders. I can do enough." She looked at the beam, then at his face. "I will pull you. You handle the mule. I can do both. No one can do both." The words came sharper than he intended. Nell went still. Then she took the lead rope in one hand and looped a shorter rope around Gideon's chest, beneath his arms. She carried its end to the east side of the doorway and wrapped it around an intact post. "I will lift the beam with the mule," she said. "Then I will hold your rope and use the post to take your weight while you crawl. That is not doing both at once." Gideon had no answer. She returned to the mule, stood near its shoulder, and shortened the traces. Ready? He planted both hands in the frozen dirt. Take it slow. Nell clicked her tongue. The mule leaned forward. Rope tightened through the first pulley, ran across the yard, and drew against the block fixed to the beam. The wagon wheel groaned beneath the changed angle. The beam shifted. Pain drove through Gideon's legs. He bit down against a shout. "Stop!" Nell called. The mule halted. "Is it worse?" It moved. "Keep going." She stepped forward with the animal. The pulley wheels turned a fraction. The sling around the beam tightened. The woodshed post bowed, then held. The beam lifted half an inch. Gideon dragged one knee. It would not clear. More. Nell looked at the post. It is bending. More. She set her jaw and led the mule another step. The beam rose. Gideon pulled with both arms. His coat snagged on a nail beneath him. He jerked once. The fabric held. Nell, the knife. She could not leave the mule without losing tension. Her gaze moved from the traces to Gideon, calculating. Then she wrapped the lead rope around the stable rail and tied it off. The mule strained against the knot. Nell ran through the wreckage, dropped beside Gideon, and drew his knife from its sheath. She sliced through the back of his coat. The woodshed post gave a loud pop. "Now," Gideon said. Nell seized the rope around his chest, braced both feet against the doorway post, and hauled. He clawed at the ground. His hips cleared first, then one knee. The beam dropped. It struck the heel of his boot as Nell dragged him through the doorway. The remaining roof came down behind them in a roar of timber and ice. Dust and snow swallowed the kitchen. Nell fell backward with Gideon across her legs. For a moment neither could breathe. Then the mule screamed outside. Nell shoved herself free and ran to release it from the strained traces. Gideon rolled onto his back, fighting for air. His legs burned, but when he bent them, both answered. Nell returned and knelt beside him. Her face had lost all color. "Tell me what is broken." "Nothing, I think." "That is not a useful answer." He almost laughed, but the movement hurt his ribs. "My left ankle. Maybe 2 ribs. Legs are bruised, not crushed." She placed a hand near his boot. "Can you stand?" "Not yet." "Then you are going to permit me to be useful." There was fear in her voice now, not panic, fear with work to do. Together they moved into the main room, away from the ruined kitchen. Gideon used the counter as a crutch, while Nell bore as much of his weight as her smaller frame allowed. He collapsed onto the sound bunk. She removed his boot with both hands. The ankle was already swelling. "Splint it," he said. "There are barrel slats in the storeroom." Nell found them, patted the joint with torn blanket, and bound it tight under his direction. She checked his breathing, then covered him with every dry wool layer she could gather. Only after the stove was fed and the shutters secured did she sit on the floor beside the bunk. Her cut glove lay somewhere beneath the wreckage. Blood striped her palms from the frozen rope. A bruise darkened along her temple. Gideon looked at her hands. "You should have gone to the stable. You would have died." "You could have died with me." "Yes." The simple answer silenced him. Nell leaned her head against the bunk frame and closed her eyes. "You told me everything leaves a sign. What sign did I leave?" That strength was the wrong tool. He looked toward the doorway, where the ropes still ran into the storm through the broken kitchen wall. "You built a block and tackle out of a mule and a wagon wheel. It was not elegant. It worked." Her eyes opened. For the first time, Gideon understood that she had not come to the mountain empty of useful knowledge. He had simply failed to recognize knowledge that did not resemble his own. He reached down and closed one hand around her scraped fingers. Nell stiffened from habit, then let them rest in his palm. "You saved my life," he said. The words came without defense or qualification. She looked at him for a long moment. "Then live long enough to repay me." Outside, the ice storm battered the broken station. Inside, Gideon kept hold of her hand until the shaking left it. By morning, the storm had weakened to a steady hiss of sleet. Nell stood in the wrecked kitchen doorway and took inventory. The roof was gone over half the room. Snow covered the stove. One wall leaned outward, but the main room remained sound. The food they had moved survived. So did the telegraph desk. Gideon could not put weight on his left foot without turning gray. "You need 3 weeks," Nell said after examining the swelling. "I need 3 days. You may negotiate with the ankle when it stops looking like a boiled turnip." He glared at her from the bunk. She handed him coffee. That ended the argument. For the next 12 days, Vale Pass ran on Nell's decisions and Gideon's voice. He taught her to set a simple snare, bank the stove overnight, and judge when the mules had worked enough. She learned slowly, bruised often, and once spent an hour following tracks that belonged to her own boots. In return, she repaired the pantry shelves, stretched their flour, and dismantled the telegraph instrument piece by piece. The first time the sounder clicked beneath her fingers, Gideon looked up from the chair where he was mending harness. "You said it was dead," Nell murmured. "It is." "No, the line is dead. The instrument is merely stubborn." She cleaned the contacts with lampblack and a strip of wool, rewound one damaged coil, and fashioned a new spring from the rib of a broken clock. By the end of the second week, the key produced a clean metallic tap. No answering current came through the wire. Still, the sound changed the station. At night, Nell practiced messages into silence. Gideon learned the rhythm of his own name before she told him what it was. Dash dash, dot dot, dash dot. "Too many pieces," he said. "So are you." He smiled before he could stop himself. His ankle improved. His ribs did not. Any deep breath still caught like a blade, and Nell barred him from the roof repairs. He obeyed only because she hid his boots. One afternoon, while fitting a patch over the broken kitchen wall, Nell found him staring at her from the doorway. "What?" "You don't look like you did in Cinder Creek." She glanced at the canvas trousers, the patched shirt, and the braid over one shoulder. "That woman lost her better clothes in a ravine." "I don't mean the clothes." The air shifted between them. Nell looked away first. "Then say what you mean." Gideon crossed the room carefully, leaning on a crutch. "I mean I was wrong. About whether I would survive one night? About what surviving looks like." He reached for her hand. The scrapes from the rescue had healed into thin red lines. Nell let him take it. A knock struck the outer door. Not wind. 3 hard blows. Gideon released her and reached for the rifle above the counter. No traveler should have been able to reach Vale Pass from the south. The bridge was gone. The northern trail had been closed by snow for a week. He motioned Nell behind the wall and opened the door 2 inches. No one stood there. Only tracks. 2 horses had approached from the north, stopped near the stable, then doubled back into the trees. Boot prints crossed the porch. One man had walked to the window beside the telegraph desk. Gideon crouched to touch the edge of a print. "Fresh." Nell went still behind him. "You know who made these," he said. Her face answered before her voice did. She carried the leather case to the counter and removed a key from a chain beneath her shirt. The locks opened with 2 small clicks. Inside lay no jewelry. Bundles of copied telegrams filled one side, along with payroll sheets, property transfers, and a black ledger stamped with the initials ACN. Nell set the ledger between them. "I worked the night wire at Creed Consolidated Freight in St. Louis," she said. "Then Amos Creed moved me into payroll because I could find errors his men could not." Gideon listened without interrupting. The errors were not errors. He billed the government for seasoned timber and used green supports in the North Tunnel. He withheld wages, bought claims through false names, and bribed inspectors. When the tunnel collapsed, 27 men died. "The camp north of here." She nodded. "I copied the messages ordering the cheaper timber. I copied the payments. Creed discovered what I had done before I could testify. He obtained papers declaring me unstable and sent Tobias Rusk to take me to a private institution." "Rusk left those tracks?" "Yes." "Why marry me?" A married woman under another name was harder to seize quietly, and Vale Pass sat beside the abandoned line. "I thought I might restore it long enough to send the evidence to Cinder Creek. You chose me because of a wire." "At first." The last 2 words landed softly. Gideon looked at the papers, then at the broken wall and the snow beyond it. "We can still burn this," he said. "You could take the northern trail when it clears. Start somewhere Creed does not know your face." Nell closed the ledger. "I have spent months disappearing while dead men carried the blame for their own graves. I will not do it again. If we send this, Creed's men will come. They have already come." Gideon saw no fearlessness in her. He saw fear accepted and carried. He laid his hand over the ledger. "Then we finish the line." They worked through the night. The break lay half a mile south where ice had torn the wire from 3 poles. Gideon could not climb, so Nell wore Owen's snowshoes while he directed from below. She hauled new copper from the station, spliced it with cold, stiff fingers, and fixed a second wire low through the trees as a hidden return line. At dawn, the instrument clicked. Once. Then again. Nell dropped into the chair. "Cinder Creek," she transmitted. "Vale Pass calling. Answer." Static trembled through the sounder. Then came a reply. "Vale Pass identify." Her eyes filled, but her hands remained steady. "Eleanor Vale. Get Sheriff Bell." Hooves thundered outside before the answer arrived. Tobias Rusk kicked open the door with another man behind him. Snow covered their shoulders. Rusk was broad, clean-shaven, and smiling as if he had entered a hotel lobby. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, "Mr. Creed has been patient." Gideon raised the rifle from behind the counter. "She gave you a different name." Rusk's smile thinned. "This need not concern you. It concerns my wife." The second man moved toward the window. Gideon fired into the floor at his feet. "Next one climbs." Rusk drew first. His shot broke the lamp. Gideon's rifle answered, driving him behind the door frame. Nell dropped beneath the telegraph desk and kept sending. "Creed Ledger here. Men attacking. Send posse North Road." A bullet tore through the desk. Wood struck her cheek. The second man ran outside. A moment later, the main wire snapped taut and went dead. "He cut it?" Nell shouted. Gideon fired through the broken kitchen wall, then jerked backward as Rusk's next shot struck his upper arm. The rifle fell from his hand. Nell saw the blood and reached for him. "The message," he said through clenched teeth. "Finish it." She crawled beneath the window, found the concealed return wire, and connected it directly to the key. The circuit sputtered. Rusk stepped into the room. "You always were clever," he said. Nell tapped the final words. "Rusk here. Creed guilty. Ledger secured." The sounder answered once from Cinder Creek. "Received." Rusk heard it. His face changed. He lunged for the case. Gideon drove into him from the side. They crashed through the doorway into the snow. Nell seized Gideon's fallen rifle. The second man appeared from behind the stable, but the mule kicked loose from its tether and scattered him against the fence. Rusk broke away and ran toward the narrow footbridge over the meltwater channel east of the station. The ledger clutched beneath his coat. Gideon followed, despite his injured arm. "Gideon, wait!" Nell knew the bridge. One rail had split in the storm, and the planks iced first where the channel mist rose. She cut across the slope. Rusk reached the center and turned with his revolver. Gideon stopped at the near end, empty-handed. "Throw down the book," Gideon said. Rusk laughed. "For your city bride? For the men in that tunnel." He could have rushed him. Nell saw the decision in his body and saw him reject it. Gideon would not trade his life for vengeance and leave her alone. He stepped back. Rusk mistook restraint for fear. He advanced. Nell struck the bridge support with the iron bar she had carried from the yard. The loosened rail dropped across Rusk's legs. He fired wide, lost his footing, and crashed onto the planks. Gideon crossed before Rusk could rise and pinned his gun hand with one boot. "Alive," Nell said, breathing hard. "He answers alive." Gideon looked down at the man who had hunted her across half a country. Then he kicked the revolver into the channel. "Alive," he agreed. Sheriff Bell reached Vale Pass near sunset with 6 men and a railroad marshal. The second attacker had fled, but Rusk remained bound to the stable post. The ledger and copied telegrams went south under armed guard. Gideon's wound was clean. The bullet had passed through the flesh of his arm. 3 weeks later, a rider brought news that Amos Creed had been arrested in Denver while attempting to board an eastbound train. A federal inquiry had begun. Nell's commitment papers had been exposed as fraudulent. The same rider carried a letter offering her safe passage, paid lodging in Cinder Creek, and a place before the territorial court. She read it twice. Gideon said nothing. By the time the South Road reopened, he had repaired the wagon and packed her case beneath the seat. He placed the letter beside it. Nell found him tightening the traces. "You are sending me away." "No. It appears remarkably similar. You asked for the right to leave. Road is open. Creed is jailed. No paper and no husband owns your next step." His voice was steady, but he would not look at her. Nell understood then what the wagon had cost him. He was giving her the one proof of love no promise could equal, a door he would not block. She climbed onto the seat. Gideon's face emptied. Then she reached down and picked up the leather case. She carried it back inside. The restored telegraph waited on the desk. Beside it stood a second chair Gideon had built during his recovery, its joints square and strong. Nell sat. The sounder clicked. Cinder Creek to Vale Pass. Report weather and road. She placed her fingers on the key. Vale Pass open. Snow-deep north slope. Travel with caution. Gideon stood in the doorway. "What about the court?" he asked. "I will testify." "And after?" Nell looked around the patched walls, the orderly shelves, Owen's snowshoes, and the stove where 2 cups waited each morning. "After, I will come home." He crossed the room slowly. "You don't owe me that. I know." She rose and placed one hand against his chest. "That is why it matters." He bent his forehead to hers. When he kissed her, there was no desperation in it, only the quiet certainty of two people who had already seen what the other did when the roof fell. By spring, Vale Pass became an official relay station again. Travelers stopped for weather reports, hot food, and repairs. Nell kept the wire alive and the ledgers exact. Gideon rebuilt the kitchen, and never again pretended inventory could live in his head. On clear evenings, the telegraph carried distant voices through the mountains. The station was no longer a monument to the brother Gideon had lost, or a hiding place for the woman Nell had been. It was a place people could reach. And when the key clicked after dark, Nell answered beneath the name she had chosen, while Gideon fed the fire and listened to the silence become something warm.